All right, so picture this. It's medieval times. You don't know much. There's dragons flying around in the sky. The science is questionable at best. The earth may or may not be flat, depending on who you ask. That's true even today, isn't it? You know what? This is going to be kind of a crazy thing to cover, I think. But you need to predict the weather, right? It's cold outside. It's snowy. It's not the greatest weather, you know. And you're trying to figure out when you can plant plants. And who do you go to? Who do you ask to figure out when you can start planting? Now you could look at the past. You know, you could look at it from a scientific perspective, but that's way too difficult. What if? And just hear me out on this. What if we took a rodent or some small animal of some kind and let them be the weather person? That might not be the best idea, but why did we start doing it in the first place? Let's talk about it. How's it going, everybody? So, since I was a little kid, I always loved the weather, right? I wanted to be a weatherman for a short time when I was like 5 or 6 years old. I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And part of that was there's a house that we were living in that I could stand on the front porch and I could, at times especially during the summer, I could look out in the afternoon and see these huge puffy clouds coming in. And I just knew, you know, you could tell a storm was coming in, right? And you could just watch it roll and get closer and closer until the rain started pouring and you had thunder and lightning. And I loved that kind of stuff. When I was probably 7 or 8, we had something called a downburst, which was my first experience of something that terrifying. It's almost like a tornado over a large area, but it's not a tornado, really. It's air coming down and hitting the ground and expanding out over the ground. Incredible winds. We thought it was all a tornado at the time. Trees were blown down all around town. Power was out. It was nuts. And that was one of my first big experiences of like, this is exciting. You know, it was lightning and thunder and just all this craziness and then this heavy wind. And it was an adrenaline rush for a kid. Like that can be really exciting or it can be really scary. For me, it was exciting. I always thought, you know, it'd be really cool to be a weatherman someday. Now, as it turns out, as I got older and I became an adult, I was like, you know, maybe I should have become a weatherman because what other profession do you get paid really well to be wrong most of the time? Now, don't take this the wrong way. Weather people, they do their best and they take the data that they have and they make a forecasted model, their best guess based off of the information that they have. But most of the time that winds up being wrong. And no more so than a couple of years ago, I started really getting into this stuff because YouTube decided to start pushing these channels that were more or less like amateur weather channels. And there's some of them that try to do a pretty good job, but they've all become really clickbaity. And you see their thumbnails, their titles, and they'll say, you know, things like, "Oh, this is going to be the worst storm in 50 years" or whatever. And it's all to build up all this hype, right? And they'll put the disclaimer when they first start the video of, you know, this is the best, you know, this is just estimate. This model is just wild. We don't know that it's even going to be accurate, but this is the worst case scenario. And it's building into people's fears. It's building into like the questions that everybody has, especially in the wintertime of like, when are we going to get snow? How much snow are we going to get? You know, I fell into that trap a few years ago because I would sit with these channels and I'd watch these guys like going in depth because I loved the maps. I loved the idea of like going in depth and all this stuff and figuring out like what all of it means and, you know, learning the meteorological terms and all that kind of stuff. And I would watch these things and every time it would become more and more clear that they were no different than the weather person I saw on TV. That a week and a half, 2 weeks out will be sharing like the long range models of there's a storm on the horizon. And, you know, you get within a few days and they're like, okay, these are some potential snowfall totals. And it felt like every time for us where we live that they would start with, okay, they're in the range where they're going to get 4 to 6 or 8 inches of snow. And by the time, like the day before the storm, it had shifted north or south one way or the other and we all of a sudden were going to get maybe an inch of snow. Which for me, I love snow, so it was kind of depressing to be like, oh God, another storm's going to pass us by, you know. And so I started to get this like ingrained I don't want to say I despise weather people, but it's annoying to watch the forecast. It's good to have the 7-day. I'll look at my phone and look at the 7-day, like, what's the temperature looking like? What's the weather looking like a few days out? But I don't trust it anymore. And you should be able to trust this stuff. You would think we would be getting better, and I suppose we have gotten better over time. But one thing that really fascinates me that we do every year in the wintertime, and the reason I bring all of this up is because Groundhog Day is still a phenomenon. It's still a thing. And I would have thought it would have died out. You know, I don't think much of it. It's a day on the calendar every year. A couple of times when I was younger and when I had cable, which we don't have cable anymore because who has cable in 2024? But like I would watch the weather or the news on February 2nd in the morning before I was going to work, and every time they'd have camera crews there for Puxatawny Phil, and they'd be like, okay, well, this is Groundhog Day. We're gonna see if he saw his shadow. Will we get 6 more weeks of winter? And I was like, why are we doing this? What in the world? But it was fun to get caught up in every year, and especially as a kid, like you believe in Santa Claus, you believe in the Easter Bunny, you believe that the groundhogs can predict the next 6, whether we're gonna have 6 weeks of winter or not. And so this year I was thinking about it, and I was like, I wanted to do something different with the video this week and talk about something. I was trying to figure out what I want to talk about, and I was like, oh, Groundhog Day is coming up. What better thing to talk about, And I looked up Groundhog Day on YouTube, and most of it's clips from the movie. And that kind of, if you've never seen, there's a movie called Groundhog Day. Bill Murray stars in it. I hadn't seen it until a few years ago, and it's kind of funny. It's got some really interesting stuff in it. Basically, he's a weather guy that goes to Puxatawny, Pennsylvania to look at the groundhog, to cover the groundhog, and he wakes up he winds up in this loop stuck in time. So every day he wakes up, it's Groundhog Day. It's starting the day over every single time. And insanity ensues. Go see the movie if you haven't. It's funny. But I digress. I was wondering, like, why do we even celebrate this? Why is this still a thing? It's 2024. We have all this science to back up all this different stuff. And what is the point of even doing this every year? Why do we consistently have Groundhog Day, and specifically with Puxatawny Phil? I know of 2 groundhogs. One is Puxatawny Phil, one is Buckeye Chuck. And I learned of that by checking out some Wikipedia stuff. So let's go check out Wikipedia. Let's see what other groundhogs there are out there, because it's kind of interesting how many there are out there. So meet me over at the computer real quick. All right, so we're all familiar with Puxatawny Phil, as we talked about. We're going to Wikipedia for this because, Wikipedia is the answer to everything. So obviously we have Puxatawny. And then regionally, obviously in the Mid-Atlantic, there's a few others. There's apparently a taxidermic specimen, or taxidermied. They took a groundhog and taxidermied it, all right? In Quarryville, Pennsylvania, I guess? Okay, well, that's interesting. Midwest, of course, we have Puxatawny Spirits, 1952. Okay, let's see. In Wisconsin, remote 2-cow village buried somewhere in the wilderness. Oh, okay. So this town in Wisconsin was called a remote 2-cow village buried somewhere in the wilderness by the Puxatawny. So obviously there's a rivalry there, from what I can tell from what I'm reading here. But they didn't like the fact that they were called that, and so they come up with their own groundhog up there in Prairie, Wisconsin. Do they have the name of the groundhog there? I don't. Oh, Jimmy the 11th. So apparently Jimmy is their groundhog up there. Buckeye Chuck, hometown favorite. I love Buckeye Chuck. The only 2 that I was aware of going into this was Buckeye Chuck and Puxatawny Phil. I assumed there was others, but Buckeye Chuck is in Marion, Ohio, and that's a big deal in Ohio every year whenever Groundhog Day comes around. But Buckeye Chuck is where we go to figure out, what the weather's going to be like. Woodstock Willie, Concord Casimir. Well, is it not a groundhog, a weather predicting cat. Based on how he eats his annual pierogi meal in Concord, Ohio. Okay. Washington, D.C., Groundhog Day, Potomac Phil. Another taxidermy. What is with taxidermying these? How is a taxidermy groundhog supposed to predict the weather is all I want to know. He first appeared in 2012 to 2018. So it was only 6 years? Phil's spring predictions invariably agree with those more of the lively Puxatawny Phil. Of course he did, because he was dead. He was a taxidermied model. Birmingham Bill. Raleigh, North Carolina has Sir Walter Raleigh. Or Sir Walter Wally? Wow. Okay. Elsewhere in the South, General Beauregard Lee makes predictions from Lebanon, Georgia. I can't even. And then, of course, even Canada takes in Wharton Willie, Nova Scotia's Groundhog Day, Dax Day from the German Docks. Okay, it's a Groundhog Day in the dialect of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. In French Canada, I'm not going to even try to speak French or pronounce any of that. Quebec until his death. Oh, Val d'Esport? D'Esport? I don't know. I'm not French. I don't speak French. I don't know. Wharton Willie, Manitoba Merv, Winnipeg Win, Balzac Billy, really? The Prairie Prognosticator, a man-sized groundhog mascot who prognosticates weather on Groundhog Day from Balzac, Alberta. Now I want to move to Balzac. Don't take that the wrong way. Okay, so I guess that's what we got. Okay, well that was an interesting. So you see, there's a bunch of different Buckeye Chucks, a bunch of different groundhogs, and different traditions, from taxidermied ones to live cats. It's really fascinating and interesting to see just how people take this and make it into a thing. And you know, it goes back. The roots go back apparently to Germany and a few hundred years ago, even, and trying to prognosticate, I think is the right word. You know, trying to figure out the weather, trying to predict what's going to happen, and it's just, you would think, is in 2024. You know, there's got to be some things, and I understand the desire to have some fun with things, right? A little tongue in cheek, a little bit of, you know, but there are people that seriously take this thing serious now. You know, it's Groundhog Day. It's just another day. I don't understand what it is about it that makes people so interested. You know, I could understand it maybe 20, 30 years ago. Even further back than that, really, because it's an interesting topic. It's something that's fun. It's something that's different. But like, why would we still continue to do this? And I think it's time that we maybe take a step back and say, Groundhog Day was a fun tradition while it lasted, but maybe let's not do it anymore. Maybe we should just stop Groundhog Day altogether. You know, have something fun in its place, because realistically it's messed up with the groundhog, right? You got this groundhog that doesn't know anything, doesn't know any better. It's an animal, and they're grabbing it out of a cage. You know, if you've never seen the ceremony, go watch the ceremony sometime, or you can look it up on YouTube. You can see past ceremonies. But like, they take this groundhog, they pull it up out of this cage, and they read this exclamation that they have about whether the groundhog has seen his shadow. And it's messed up. I don't understand why we feel the need to continue doing this. Why we can't just say, okay, you know what? It was fun while it lasted. Let's go ahead and just end it. You know, why? Groundhogs, they're fascinating animals. They're an interesting animal to look at. But we don't need to continue doing the Groundhog Day thing. I think it's just something that we need to get rid of. We need to push past and say, okay, we're done with Groundhog Day. Let's have some other fun. Let's do something different, right? So that's my take on Groundhog Day. I thought it was something that's been kind of bugging me. Realistically, it's bothered me for a few years, but it's something that this year in particular, because I've been starting to do these vlogs more often, I was like, I really want to talk about this because it's something that really I don't think anybody talks enough about. It's just something that happens, and we have one day a year, we pull this groundhog up out of this groundhog that's not even a wild groundhog. We're not sitting there waiting for a groundhog to pop up because that was how I imagined it when I was younger. I imagine all these media people sitting around waiting for this groundhog to pop his head up out of the ground, look around, and either go back in or come out and walk around. It's literally just these guys in a top hat. They look all fancy and they read off of a scroll that they've typed up of what's going to happen. And from my research, it looks like they're anywhere from like 36 to 40% accuracy over the past 60 years or so. And that's just basically since they've been keeping like good records of temperatures and depending on how you track an early spring and that kind of stuff. And honestly, with global climate change, is the groundhog even going to be accurate at all? Because like we're getting an early spring, it seems like most years now, with the occasional winter storm maybe plowing through at some point during the time. But like it's February. It's about to be February 1st. It's January 31st as I record this. And we've got temperatures forecast to be in the 50s in the next few days. Like, is that not an early spring? Do we need a groundhog to tell us that? Do we need a weather person to tell us that, honestly? Maybe it's time to tone it back on the weather forecasting stuff. Don't get so crazy about it. Don't get so hyped about it. And don't let some little mammal rodent thing tell you about what the weather's supposed to be like. But that's kind of going to do it for the video for today. I've got some other topics coming up. I've got some fun things planned. There's been some interesting things over the past couple of weeks as I've been doing these. A lot of you have been finding me on here and subscribing and that kind of stuff, and I appreciate that. Thank you. If you made it this far and you're not already subscribed, subscribe to the channel. Leave comments down below. Try to leave like interesting or fun comments down below. And don't be like that person on the last video. I did the video on the Stanley Cup, and I had somebody comment, basically bashing me for not linking the video from Swell Entertainment that I talked about. The thing is with things like that, those videos aren't really. It wasn't a response video, And on YouTube, you don't have to link things, right? I meant to. I always try to link videos if I talk about a specific video. I just forgot that time. But that person got really rude, and I left the comment up because I was like, you make yourself look like an idiot if you don't know anything about me. If you don't, if you're coming in and the first thing you say is something that sounds completely stupid, and acting like I'm some kind of a moron or a malicious person because I didn't link a video, like, get over yourself, honestly. I try to be a positive light and try not to be mean to other people, but like if you're gonna make a comment that's ignorant, if you don't know anything about me, if you haven't watched any of my other content, if you haven't even watched through, I mean, there will be people that might comment stuff that don't even watch to this point in the video, right? And why? What is wrong with you? 9 times out of 10, I'll remove your comment, but or I'll hide you from the channel so you won't even know that your comment's hidden, actually. But on that note, I do want to say thank you all for watching. We're going to have another couple of fun videos coming out in the next couple of weeks. With Valentine's Day coming up, I've got a special video planned for that, so keep an eye out there. I've got my streams and gaming videos and philosophy and ethics stuff all coming out, so that's all coming up soon on the channel, so keep an eye out for all of that. The shorts and all that fun stuff. But thank you all for watching. Join my Patreon. I need to shout that out more often. I'm trying to remember to get better about that. If you want to help support the channel, you can join the Patreon. You get your name up in the video, early access, that kind of stuff. And that's all I got for now. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.